Hello everyone and welcome once again back to StarCraft 2 with this time my TvZ choice of build. In the same vein where in the last episode I covered my TvT build for the mirror matchup, in this episode I'll be covering what choice of build I very much prefer for the Terran versus Zerg matchup in an online setting. So without further ado, let us hop in and let's hit play. So here we are in game. So the long and short of it is I really like a very clean macro game, just in terms of letting a game settle in a very kind of natural setting without kind of going super aggressive and playing any kind of cheese. In that sense, I go for a Reaper fast expand opening, which, as I explained in the TvT video, which was previous in this mini-series of mine, the Reaper fast expand opening is very standard in the Terran versus Zerg matchup because it allows you to get going with a 2-base economy very quickly, and it really just meshes well with the general way the matchup works against Zerg, because Zerg also wants to macro up as much as it can most of the time. Of course, you'll have your aggressive, baneling busts and things like that, but yeah, more often than not, people will be wanting to get up to 3 bases fairly quickly when they're playing as Zerg. And once again, we are playing against the AI. Even though it is elite, it is very much AI, so just ignore what the AI does. It's purely there, so I've got something to kind of focus on. But yeah, Zergs on ladder will often, if they're playing a standard game, go for a very quick 3-base kind of play thing. So we, as the Terran player, whilst we are more aggressive than the Zerg, since we don't have quite as much late game potential with us not having creep, we do still want to keep up. So the Reaper fast expand opening allows us to very quickly go into 2 bases and get, just churn out those 2 SCVs at a time, and later on into 3 bases. So how do you get onto Reaper fast expand as an opening? Well, considering if you're constantly making SCVs, after your first supply depot, you queue up your SCV to go from the supply depot to wherever you want your barracks, which often in Terran vs Zerg, given all of the melee units that Zerg has to work with, you make a wall-off on your ramp going into your main base. Depending on the map, that might be at your natural expansion or your main. On Acolyte, one of the new maps this season, it is on your main ramp, so queue your SCV once it finishes the depot to go around here and then make the barracks as soon as you have the minerals, without skipping out on any SCVs. And then, with the same purpose of continuously making SCVs, queue up your refinery and fill it up with workers as quickly as you can, basically as soon as it's made. And the way that works out is, as soon as the barracks finishes, you will have 50 or around 48, 44 gas, and you will very quickly be able to just make that Reaper and get the scouting information that you need. So there you go, as soon as it was completed, we have a Reaper coming out, which is lovely. And from there, you just queue your SCV to go down to your natural expansion location, and basically just start building your second command center. As I said, a very economical build that really sets you up well for the mid game and late game. Naturally, if your natural expansion is somewhat exposed, which isn't often the case, but if it is, you can similarly just queue up your SCV to build it in a safer location, so closer to your main base where your military units can actually protect it. But the next stage of the build, and into the build proper, I suppose, after the opening, is we will be going into a Hellion harass into Cloaked Banshee type of play. This is somewhat similar to the TvT build that I like, where you get a Cloaked Banshee, and you have some potential to do some damage that way, and all the advantages that the Cloaked Banshee gives, it being both a flying unit and very maneuverable, very microable, as well as having the chance to get invisible, which is lovely for all sorts of reasons. But the Hellions as well, it's a really nice complementary style, because the Hellions give you very easy answers to the light units that Zerg often favour, such as Zerglings and Banelings, as Hellions do indeed get a damage bonus to those types of units. And of course can hit multiple of them, and given how Zerg actually works, it being the swarm race, having typically more units than you have as the Terran, the Hellions' AoE damage effect is really powerful as well in that sense. So that's what we're going to be doing. And how do you get there? Well, as soon as your barracks finishes and you've got your expansion going up, and you've got the gas to do so, assuming of course that you take your second gas, at this point as well, you start building your factory, and at the same time, immediately afterwards, you start a reactor on your barracks. This allows you to swap over the barracks onto the position of the factory and vice versa, giving you the chance to make 2 Hellions at a time, up to around about 4 or 6, maybe more if you get a bunch of damage done, Hellions, which as mentioned are pretty damn good as a unit. So if we speed up a bit here, the factory finishes, we will be swapping over onto the barracks reactor, and from there we will be starting double Hellion production up to, personally I quite like 4, just saving the extra minerals, but you can go up to 6 if you feel the need, or if your opponent looks like they're going for some kind of aggressive play using early tier 1 units. So on this bit, very similar to the Terran build that I prefer for TvT, I also swap over the Barracks' tech lab. I'd swap over the Starport onto that tech lab, swap the Barracks into another position, and then start Cloaked Banshee. And similar to how I did in the Terran versus Terran build, you can just save yourself some multitasking brain capacity, which is always nice, and just rally the Starport over to a patch of safe space near your opponent's base. I quite like some kind of dead air zones, such as on Acolyte around here is pretty nice, where the Zerg would need an Overlord specifically there, plus a Queen to deal with it, or even just back here is also perfectly acceptable. And then you can, at a later date, once you've got the time, just queue it up to attack, move, and hold position, get some drone kills, get some extra information, etc, etc. So the Hellions will go by, you'll get some drone kills. Naturally, this being just a very rough example, I didn't micro too hard, I was more focusing on getting the macro nice and solid, but there you go, you get some drone kills. Even having not microed that much at all, I still traded evenly with the Zerg because of the light damage bonus that we get from the Hellions. I take out a bunch of drones, which is a good trade actually for the Terran. You might be thinking, well, Hellions are 100 minerals, how is that a good trade? Well, it's a good trade because drones make extra income, whereas Hellions just fight. So you've actually devastated their economy to some extent, whilst not impacted yours at all, and just lost some fairly cheap and expendable fighting units, them only costing minerals, which is perfectly affordable. So once you've got your Banshee into position, naturally, as I mentioned, just queue it up to get some damage done. Just have it hold position near a mineral line. Although against Zerg it is worth mentioning, if you see a Queen, be very careful, because if an Overseer kind of just slides in, you could be in for a bit of trouble. But naturally the game will warn you if you start taking damage on your Banshee, so it's not too hard to micro, really. Of course, there is a chance that your opponent actually scouts your build and is familiar with it, in which case they might put some spores down, in which case you can still get a few drone kills, poke at the edges. Instead of going center and then attacking the drones, you can go more towards the edge and attack the drones if, say, a spore was around here and there was a Queen around, as there is in this case. But yeah, it's really up to you how you micro it. But either way, even if they have spores, you can still often get some kind of payback for the investment into the Cloaked Banshee tech. And from there, it's really up to you as to what you do. If you get a bunch of damage done with your earlier kind of aggression and your harassment with the Banshee and the Hellions, you can go for a 2-base all-in attack with tanks and things like that. Or, as I did in this case, I just made a 3rd CC, expanded down to the low ground, and just added on extra production. At some point, you want to be getting stim from your barracks, as that naturally is what you need to make bio at all good. Alternatively, of course, you can go for mech, as this build does start off with Hellions, it goes into Cloaked Banshee, and then you can go into, just dedicated tank production, and etc, etc, which would also be a valid plan, just depends on your playstyle. I personally opt for bio, but it's entirely up to you. And yeah, you can get some upgrades, slap down a couple of engineering bays and your armory, and start reactoring out all of those juicy medevacs for your later drops with your bio troops. And yeah, that's really the build. Do some just scouting with your first Reaper from your Reaper Fast Expand, see what build they're going for, play it safe, respond to what they're doing. But if they're going for a macro build, a standard macro game, then you can very safely attack with some Hellions, get some drone kills, back out, and then attack again with your Cloaked Banshee, get more drone kills, further hinder their economy, and back out again, hopefully without losing the Banshee. But of course, sometimes you miss micro, or the opponent plays particularly cleverly in detecting it and killing it, in which case, turnabout's fair play, you've already done a bunch of damage, probably. So this build is very nice, it sets you up into a very solid macro game, and it also is similar to my personal favourite Terran versus Terran build, which was a previous episode. It has plenty of chances to just win the game through the amounts of damage that it potentially can do with the Hellion run-by and the Banshee attack, if the opponent somehow played super greedy. But unlike in the Terran matchup, in this matchup, most Zergs make a fair amount of queens, so it's quite unlikely that you will just win the game outright, as it's fairly simple for them to just start making a few spores in their mineral lines. But even if they do that, they just gave up 3 or 2 of their drones voluntarily and cost them a bunch of extra minerals, so that's still not too bad for you. So there you go, guys. That's my current favoured Terran versus Zerg build in StarCraft 2 multiplayer 1v1 ranked. Coming up next, which should be tomorrow, I will do my personal Terran versus Protoss build. But until then, it's been a pleasure, as always. Hope you enjoyed and found this at all educational and or inspirational, and I'll see you next time.